Monday's headlines in Buenos Aires insisted that the carrier had been seriously damaged, but military sources here began to back off, saying they weren't sure it was the Invincible. Meanwhile, the British continued to shell Port Stanley as 3,500 troops that came aboard the Queen Elizabeth II were reported ashore on East Falkland Island. Foreign Minister Nicanor Costa-Mendez summed up the military position for his country.
I'm personally, as every human being, I'm very sad because of the loss of lives.
Tuesday, British troops were reported within 12 miles of Argentine defenses around Port Stanley. Harrier jets continued to soften up the Argentine positions, and Pucara light attack planes attacked the British front lines. Wednesday marked 2 months of Argentine control of the Malvinas Islands, and they found themselves surrounded by British troops with their backs to the South Atlantic and continuing bombardment from the fleet. The Hecla arrived in Montevideo carrying badly wounded British soldiers who would be flown home for treatment. Thursday, 24 civilians arrived in Buenos Aires after their release in Montevideo by the British. They had been aboard the Narwhal, a fishing vessel the British accused of being a spy ship, and then sank. Crewmen said the British Harrier jets had strafed their lifeboats. Meanwhile, there was talk of an emergency interim government as the junta seemed to lose support in Argentina because of the Malvinas conflict. On Friday, Argentina refused to concede defeat and warned of a fight to the death at Port Stanley. The Argentine military, dismissed as sheer fantasy, claims that 20 Soviet technicians were installing sophisticated radar equipment at Comodoro Rivadavia. And a group of women of British descent wrote petitions to Queen Elizabeth for an end to the bloodshed. On Saturday, Argentina ordered the offices of news service Noticias Argentinas closed for violating self-censorship rules announced a month ago. The news service said it was a discriminatory action and it was set to last 3 days. As the week drew to a close, more cold, rain, and wind lashed both the British and Argentine troops on the islands as both sides girded for the Battle of Port Stanley, and hopes for a settlement to avoid more killing seemed to be waning. Jim Clancy, CNN, Buenos Aires.
Argentine military sources are putting out the story that the British blockade is being pierced and that fresh troops have been sent to reinforce the islands. Few details have been given. The reinforcements include soldiers from this regiment, it is said. Soldiers who were in training this week on the mainland near a military base 1,100 miles south of Buenos Aires. It's there where troops guarded the coastline against possible British commando raids or troop landings. In London, British defense sources say Argentina's arms supplies may have been partially restocked by its allies in the hemisphere. An Argentine official in Guatemala is quoted as saying 350 soldiers have been supplied from that country. Another story given currency is the Argentine claim that a lack of British air activity over the contested capital of the Falklands is proof that Britain's ability to strike from the air has been severely depleted. Today is Reporters' Day in this country. A mass for Argentine reporters was sparsely attended. The dictatorship celebrated by shutting down 2 news organizations on charges of violating wartime censorship regulations. A local newspaper was closed and a major Argentine wire service was silenced, both for 3 days. Morton Dean, CBS News, Buenos Aires.
The newspaper and news agency were ordered shut down for 72 hours. The Noticias Argentinas agency in Buenos Aires and El Patagónica newspaper in Comodoro Rivadavia were accused of violating the junta's order for self-censorship in reporting the war. President Galtieri signed the order, charging they had published sensitive information regarding troop movements and resupply on the islands. The editor for Noticias Argentinas claimed the censorship was discriminatory because other agencies had published similar reports in even greater detail. At least one magazine included a detailed map of the war zone with an in-depth analysis of not one, but two possible strategies to be used by the Argentines in a counter-offensive against the British. The military was also reportedly miffed by a photo which appeared on the front cover of an Argentine tabloid. It reportedly showed the British aircraft carrier Invincible with smoke pouring from its deck after an Argentine airstrike. The photo was deemed a fake and an embarrassment to the Air Force. 3 foreign journalists, including a Newsweek reporter, were ordered to leave the country earlier in the conflict for reporting what the Argentine government claimed were breaches of Argentina's national security. James Allen Miklashevsky, CNN, Buenos Aires.
A pause in the war provides time for this Argentine soldier in Port Stanley to be baptized. But as this peaceful religious act was being shown on television here, Argentine war strategists were preparing for the British onslaught on the capital.
One idea being discussed is the possibility of opening a second front against the British, perhaps attacking them from the rear. But since Argentine forces have their backs to the sea, such a move would be very difficult at best. The Argentine government said today that its troops shelled British positions with ground artillery, while reinforcements were sent to the front.
And this British hospital ship, the Uganda, symbolizes a ray of cooperation between the embittered enemies. The Uganda recently met up with an Argentine vessel, the Bahia Blanca, to exchange wounded prisoners. The government has shut down one of Argentina's leading news agencies for 72 hours for violating national security laws. Sources say the offending article reported by Noticias Argentinas was about the resumption of supply flights from the mainland to the Malvinas. But if that news agency isn't writing anything now, thousands of Argentines are. Local students organized a letter-writing campaign. People here are sending notes around the world giving their side of the story in the conflict. Recipients' names were picked at random from telephone books. And workers are now constructing stands and making room for Pope John Paul II's 33-hour visit to Argentina. The pontiff will stay in Buenos Aires and will conduct a mass at the cathedral in Luján. Bob Berkowitz, ABC News, Buenos Aires.